When my parents refused to watch my twins during my emergency surgery, I thought nothing could hurt worse. Then my mother called me a burden and hung up because she had front-row tickets to a Rolling Stones concert. Lying in that hospital bed on Christmas Eve, I realized something. I had spent my whole life proving my worth to people who never cared. But when they lost everything and came begging for my help, they finally learned what it felt like to be ignored. It was Christmas Eve, and the sharp sting in my abdomen felt like a blade twisting deeper with every breath. The monitors beeped steadily beside me, a cruel reminder that my body was failing, and yet the real pain came from the words echoing through my hospital room. "Don't you dare ask us to cancel our plans again. We've had these Rolling Stones tickets for months." My mother's voice crackled through the speakerphone, filled with irritation rather than concern. I clutched my phone with trembling fingers, stunned into silence. In the corner of the hospital room, my 2-year-old twins, Ethan and Lily, played quietly, oblivious to the weight of my desperation. They had already lost their mother 6 months ago. Now, if this surgery went wrong, they might lose me too. "Dad, please," I tried one last time, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I have no one else. I just need someone to watch them while I'm in surgery." A heavy sigh. Then my father's voice, colder than the hospital's fluorescent lights. "Ryan, we're retired now. We deserve to enjoy our lives without your constant problems." Problems? That's what I was to them. I had sent them $2,500 every month for years, covering their mortgage, their vacations, their early retirement dreams, all while juggling my own grief, raising 2 toddlers alone, and barely scraping by. And yet, the first time I truly needed them, they turned their backs on me without hesitation. The call ended with a click, and for a long moment I just stared at the phone screen, feeling something inside me crack apart. "Are you okay?" my nurse Valerie asked softly. I wasn't. Not even close. But before I could answer, she continued, "I know someone who can help. My friend Jason, he's a professional nanny, great with kids, especially kids who've been through trauma." I hesitated. Strangers had shown me more kindness in minutes than my own parents had in a lifetime. I thought of Ethan and Lily, their tiny faces looking up at me with trust one couldn't afford to break. "Yes," I whispered. "Call him." And with those words, I made the first real decision for myself in years. I wasn't just cutting off my parents' money. I was cutting off the poison they had poured into my life for far too long. When I woke up, the dull ache in my abdomen was a reminder that I had made it through surgery. The room was quiet except for the rhythmic beeping of the monitors and the soft sound of Ethan's breathing. He was curled up beside me, his tiny hand resting on my arm. Lily was in Jason's lap, playing with a stuffed giraffe he had brought for her. The moment I reached for my phone, I already knew what I would find. 27 missed calls. Dozens of messages. Not one asking if I had survived. Not one checking on Ethan and Lily. Instead, they followed a predictable pattern, first confusion, then anger, then desperation. At first, my parents demanded an explanation, acting as if I had cut them off for no reason. Then, when I didn't respond, the tone shifted. They reminded me of everything they had done for me, as if raising me was a debt I was still expected to repay. And finally, when they realized I wasn't giving in, the panic set in. They had built their lifestyle around my money, and now that lifeline was gone. I scrolled past message after message until I saw the one that made my stomach turn. "You can't do this to us, Ryan. We have a cruise booked next month. The tickets are non-refundable." I let out a breathless laugh, one of those sharp, bitter ones that come when reality is so absurd you have to laugh to keep from screaming. I had nearly died, and they were worried about a vacation. Jason must have noticed the look on my face because he spoke up. "I take it they finally realized they're on their own?" I nodded, tossing the phone onto the blanket beside me. "They're acting like I just ripped the rug out from under them. Like they're the victims." Jason sighed, shifting Lily in his arms. "People like that always do. They never see the damage they cause until it directly affects them." I stared at my phone for a long moment, then reached for it again. "Can you hand me my phone?" With steady fingers, I opened my banking app and canceled every automatic transfer I had set up for my parents. Then I opened my messages and typed the last thing I would ever say to them. "I will no longer be providing financial support. My children and I deserve better than being your afterthoughts. Do not contact me again." I hit send, turned my phone on silent, and leaned back against the pillows. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. The silence didn't last long. By the time I was discharged from the hospital 5 days later, the messages had doubled. My parents had finally realized I wasn't bluffing, and their panic was in full swing. The shift in tone was almost laughable. First came the guilt-tripping, then the accusations, and now pure desperation. At first, they acted as if this was a misunderstanding. They called, texted, even emailed, claiming they had been caught off guard when I called from the hospital. That they didn't realize how serious my condition was. As if missing their son's emergency surgery was something they could simply brush off with an apology. Then, when I didn't respond, the insults started. I was ungrateful, selfish, cruel. How could I do this to them after everything they had sacrificed? How could I throw my own parents away over one bad decision? And finally, when it became clear that I wasn't giving in, their true fear was exposed. The money was gone, and they had no plan to survive without it. They had spent recklessly for years, living well beyond their means under the assumption that I would always be there to pick up the pieces. Now, the pieces were crumbling around them, and for the first time, they had no one to blame but themselves. I ignored every message, every voicemail, every attempt to guilt me into fixing the mess they had created. But then my brother called. Dylan had always been their favorite, the golden child, the one they never asked for money because they had never needed to. He was the success story, the one they boasted about at dinner parties. But now, for the first time in his life, he was seeing them for who they really were. "They lied to me," he said the moment I answered. His voice was sharp, angrier than I'd ever heard him. "They told me you were having a minor procedure, that you were being dramatic. I only just found out it was emergency surgery." I exhaled slowly, closing my eyes. Of course they did. They didn't even tell me you were in the hospital. I had to hear it from Aunt Carol. That didn't surprise me either. Our parents had spent years painting me as the problem child, the one who distanced himself from the family. It was easier than admitting they were the ones pushing me away. I just wanted to say. Dylan hesitated, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "I'm sorry, man. I should have seen it sooner." I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me wanted to be angry, to ask how he could have been so blind for so long. But the other part of me knew that when you're raised in a house like ours, it's easier to believe the version of the story that keeps you comfortable. I let out a breath. "It's not your fault." There was a long pause before he said, "They're in real trouble, Ryan. The bank's been calling. They're behind on their mortgage. They're panicking." I knew what was coming next before he even said it. "They're going to ask you for help. They already have." Dylan was silent for a long moment. Then finally he sighed. "What are you going to do?" I didn't even have to think about it. Nothing. Took them less than a week to show up at my apartment. I wasn't surprised. I had ignored their calls, blocked their numbers, shut down every attempt they had made to manipulate me. They had lost control over me, and they didn't know how to handle it. When I opened the door, my mother was clutching her designer handbag like it was a lifeline. My father stood beside her, arms crossed, his expression a careful mix of frustration and forced patience. I knew that look well. It was the one he wore when he was about to pretend he was doing me a favor. "We need to talk," he said. I kept the door partially closed. "I have nothing to say to you." My mother let out a dramatic sigh. "Ryan, we are your parents. You can't just cut us off like this." I raised an eyebrow. "I think I already did." She winced, as if my words physically hurt her. But I wasn't buying it. "We're struggling, Ryan," she continued, shifting tactics. "The bank is threatening to foreclose. We just need some time to get things sorted. And you want me to fix it." My father's patience finally snapped. "We need $14,000 to get caught up. That's not unreasonable. You make good money." I blinked. "Unbelievable. This is serious, Ryan." His voice hardened. "You don't want to see your parents lose their home, do you?" I let out a slow, deliberate breath and met his gaze head-on. "You mean the home you chose to retire in early? The one you took a second mortgage on to buy a boat? That home?" My mother flinched, but my father barely reacted. I shook my head. "No." Their shock was almost comical. "What do you mean, no?" My mother looked genuinely confused, as if the idea of me refusing them had never once occurred to her. "I mean no," I repeated. "I mean I am not giving you another cent. I am not fixing your mistakes. I am not your safety net. I am done." She let out a sharp breath. "Ryan, please." I almost died. My voice was steady, but I could feel the anger rising beneath it. I was lying in a hospital bed, bleeding internally, And you chose a concert over me. You didn't visit. You didn't call. You didn't even ask if I survived. Their silence was deafening. I stepped back and gripped the door. Sell the boat. Sell the timeshare. Get jobs. Do whatever you have to do. But this is not my problem anymore. Then, without another word, I shut the door in their faces. 6 months had passed since I had shut the door in their faces, but their presence still lingered like an echo from a life I no longer wanted to be part of. I didn't hear from them directly, not for a while, but they didn't just disappear. First, they kept trying. My email inbox filled with long-winded messages, bouncing between anger and desperation. My father demanded that I reconsider. My mother played the victim. They tried to guilt me, reminding me that family sticks together, that I was punishing them for one mistake. But I didn't respond. I didn't engage. And when they realized they weren't getting through to me, they turned to our extended family. I found out about the mass email through Dylan. "They're telling everyone you abandoned them," he said one evening over the phone. His voice was tight, like he was holding back frustration. "Saying you just cut them off with no warning, leaving them destitute." I exhaled, rubbing my temple. "Let me guess. They left out the part where they refused to watch my kids while I was in emergency surgery?" "Oh, they left out a lot," Dylan said dryly. "According to them, you just woke up one day and decided to ruin their lives. That was the final straw for me. I had been content to let them dig their own grave. But if they wanted to rewrite history, I wasn't going to sit quietly and let them. So I told the truth. I responded to the email, keeping it simple and factual. 6 months ago, I underwent emergency surgery with a significant risk of complications. My parents refused to care for my children during this time because they had concert tickets. They have been relying on my financial support for years while contributing nothing in return. I have chosen to focus on my recovery and my children rather than continuing this arrangement. I sent it. Then I turned off my phone and took my kids outside to play. By the time I checked my messages again, the damage was done. Cousins, aunts, uncles, people who had never really taken sides before, started reaching out. Some apologized for believing my parents' lies. Others were just stunned at how deep their selfishness ran. And then there were the few, like Aunt Patty, who tried to convince me to be the bigger person. "They're struggling, Ryan. You don't want to see them homeless, do you?" That was the thing, though. They weren't homeless. They weren't destitute. They just weren't comfortable anymore. And that, more than anything, was what they couldn't handle. I ignored Aunt Patty's message, just like I ignored every voicemail my parents left. But then Dylan called again. "They got the foreclosure notice," he said, his voice quieter this time. "They have 60 days to catch up on their mortgage, or they're out." I should have felt something. Relief, triumph, satisfaction even. But all I felt was nothing. "They're going to ask you for help again," Dylan continued. "Mom still thinks you're bluffing. She keeps saying you'll come around." I let out a slow breath, my grip tightening on the phone. Then she doesn't know me at all. 2 weeks later, they showed up at my door. I wasn't surprised. I had been expecting them. My mother's face was drawn, her usual polished appearance slightly frayed. My father, always the proud one, looked stiff, uncomfortable, like he hated the fact that he had to be here. "We need to talk," he said. I kept my hand on the doorframe, blocking them from stepping inside. "I don't have anything to say." My mother let out a sharp breath. "Ryan, please. This has gone on long enough. We're your parents." I arched a brow. "Funny. You didn't seem too concerned about being my parents when I was lying in a hospital bed, wondering if I'd survive." She flinched, but my father pushed forward. "We need $14,000 to catch up on the mortgage. If we don't, we lose the house." I stared at them, waiting for something more. An apology, a sign of real remorse. Some proof that this wasn't just another attempt at manipulation. But it never came. All they wanted was my money. Just like always, I shook my head. "Sell the boat. Sell the timeshare. Figure it out." My mother's voice cracked. "We'd take a loss on the boat. And whose fault is that?" I shot back. "You chose this life. You chose to retire early. You chose to live beyond your means. And when you realized you couldn't afford it, you chose to depend on me. That was never my responsibility. My father's face darkened. We raised you, Ryan. We took care of you. And now, when we need you the most, you're turning your back on us. I let out a humorless laugh. When I needed you the most, you went to a concert. Silence. The weight of my words hung between us, heavier than anything money could fix. My mother sniffed, dabbing at her eyes. We made one mistake, Ryan. Are you really going to let us lose everything over one mistake? This isn't about one mistake, I said quietly. This is about a lifetime of choices. And I'm finally choosing myself. Then, before she could respond, I shut the door. I thought that was the end of it. I thought they would disappear from my life completely. But one afternoon, I found a letter in my mailbox. It was from my mother. I almost threw it away without opening it. But something made me pause. It wasn't like her. She didn't do handwritten letters. Curiosity got the best of me. Ryan, it started. I know I don't deserve a response, but I hope you'll read this anyway. I've had time to reflect, and I see now how much I failed you. I was selfish. I resented your independence instead of being proud of it. And when you needed me, I let you down. I can't change what I did, but I need you to know that I regret it more than I can put into words. I read it twice, trying to find the catch. There wasn't one. She didn't ask for money. She didn't beg for forgiveness. She didn't try to manipulate me. It was just an apology. Dylan called a week later. They've changed, you know, he said. Dad got a part-time job. Mom's working too. They're actually managing on their own. I didn't know how to respond to that. They still talk about you, he continued. They want to see you. I let out a breath, running a hand through my hair. I don't know if I'm ready for that. Then don't rush it, Dylan said simply. Just think about it. And for the first time in a long time, I did. I met them at a coffee shop. Neutral ground. They looked different. Not just physically, though my father had lost weight, and my mother no longer had her designer bags and expensive jewelry, but in their presence. They were quieter, less entitled. We sat in awkward silence for a while until my father finally spoke. I was a terrible father, he admitted, and an even worse grandfather. I studied him, waiting for the usual excuses. The deflection. The guilt-tripping. It never came. For the first time, I saw genuine remorse in his eyes. I wasn't ready to forgive them. Not fully, but I was willing to listen. Because in the end, I had already won. I had built a life without them. A life where love wasn't conditional. A life where I was finally free. And whether or not they ever became part of it again, that choice belonged to me. This story is more than just a tale of betrayal and redemption. It's a lesson in self-worth, boundaries, and the power of walking away from toxic relationships. Too often, we're told that family should always come first, no matter how much they hurt us. But the truth is, family isn't just about blood, it's about love, respect, and mutual support. Ryan spent years sacrificing his own well-being for parents who only saw him as a safety net. The moment he chose himself and his children over their endless demands, his life began to change for the better. And in the end, the people who truly care about us will show it, not through words, but through actions. Now, I want to hear from all of you. What do you think about Ryan's decision? Comment 2 if you think he did the right thing by cutting them off, or comment 7 if you think he should have helped them one last time. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to Mr.HeartVibes for more powerful, thought-provoking stories like this. Your support helps bring more content like this to life.